All right, welcome everybody. This is the monthly live stream from the Urbit Foundation. This is the third Wartime address featuring Curtis Yarvin. In case you have not been in the loop or this is your first time joining in a few months, the quick update here is that Curtis Yarvin, the inventor of Urbit, who stepped away from the project for several years, has recently returned to steer the ecosystem. And this evening, I believe Curtis has quite a thorough presentation to share. He will be sharing some very interesting details showing how his thinking and the strategy of the Urbit Foundation has evolved and updated since our last presentation 1 month ago. So as always, we will be taking questions from Urbit exclusively from the radio app on Urbit. So I'll be monitoring that throughout Curtis's presentation this evening, and I'll be collating questions. And when Curtis is done with his presentation, I will float those questions by Curtis. So if you have any questions you want to send to Curtis, please log them in the radio app where people are watching this live stream on Urbit. It's also being broadcast to Twitter and YouTube as well. Without further ado, we have Curtis here. Let me bring him on stage.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
And thanks to our friend Glueware for that awesome intro. And beautiful, beautiful, haunting videos as always. Do we know what it means, Justin? I don't think we know. I don't think we know, but it means something, and it's good, and the music is good.
Beautiful.
And so, all right. So people wonder, in the words of a great Tom Waits song, what's he building in there? What are we building in there? And for the first time ever in these addresses, we have a demo video to roll, and so it's not does not contain everything we've been doing, and there are certain it is a video of a real thing, but has been, as one does with demos, has been perhaps massaged a little bit, and so it's not exactly a perfect screen recording. Just sort of warning you for. But oh yeah. Sorry. Yes, Justin. Let's roll that, and then I'll explain it, and then I'll roll it again. So just kind of watch it. All right. What did we just see? What's going on in there? What's going on in there is the new proposed Piraeus flow that we've put together. What happens in that video is that you log in to urbit.org with your master ticket, remembering that your master ticket is just another Urbit name that's twice as long as your name. So it's a 64-bit name. Actually, I just was speaking with Sarlev Sarsen, and he had a very intriguing idea. He thinks that instead of Urbit names, we should call them Urbit numbers, on the principle that they're sort of more like phone numbers than like names. They're like phone numbers that sound like names, and if we sell them as names, there's a little bit of pushback. But if you sell them as numbers, they're very, very convenient numbers. So that's an excellent idea, and our marketing department will be preparing a long report on the subject law. So what you see is that we log in there, basically with your name and ticket, which is just like a regular login flow, except both the name and ticket are chosen for you. You log in, you're immediately prompted by a modern computer with a modern browser to save your ticket in a passkey. And what you're doing is you're essentially taking this thing and you're saving it in a way that it is protected by the hardware security enclave on your iPhone or your laptop or whatever this is. So it's actually about as safe as you can get in this enclave. And your login should not be, I mean, it can be if you're on some kind of ancient hardware device, but your login, for normal people, with however they get an Urbit, and it might be through a ship and a ticket. You log in once, your ticket gets changed, you save that ticket in a passkey, and then after that, you never have to use the ticket. But we still want to occasionally, and this is not in this video, we still want to occasionally prompt you for that ticket in the same way that Signal prompts you for your PIN. And the reason is that essentially, if you know that you remember your ship and ticket pair, you basically lose this kind of terror that everyone has when they're in crypto land of, what if I lose my keys? And the easiest way to know that you can't, lose your keys is to know that you remember them. Now, under normal usage circumstances, that brain wallet should stay in your brain. But and of course, for crypto nerds, you can certainly connect your MetaMask or whatever it is. But remembering your ship and ticket makes you basically, it's almost as if all of your data is in your brain. If your brain gets wiped out in a car crash, your data is gone too. But I think that's the last, probably, of your concerns. So you log in and you see the new Piraeus interface, which is an automatically tiling interface. So it's like you see windows adjusting within boundaries, but windows don't overlap. Instead, we create a kind of a tiling structure that with, although you don't see that much of it in this video, with basically a zoom in out paradigm, as if your whole digital life is basically on sort of the square of your screen, and to get to something inside it, you can zoom very deeply in. This should not be sort of an overwhelming metaphor. You should just, like, you don't have to actually manually like fly over your thing and go, it does it for you. But that's the navigation that's the navigation metaphor, is that your whole digital life is sort of one flat sheet of paper with infinitely fine resolution that you zoom in and out of. And then once what you see once you've logged in there is you see 4 classes of application. And again, this is actually working here. So certain things have been edited to make it look more like it should, but this is actually running stuff. The first kind of app you see, and all of these very, very, the achievement here is that we have 4 very, very different kinds of things, technically all looking like the same thing at the user level. We have wallet applications, or a wallet application that basically manages your wallet directly and only interacts with the blockchain, does not interact with your Arvo machine at all. We have captive apps, which basically do not interact with an Arvo VM or ship, do not interact with, they don't actually require you to be running an Arvo instance, but the backend is centralized, but the login uses these same credentials. You have legacy landscape apps, which are normal Gall apps, with the existing design running on your Arvo. And then we also have a shrubbery style sky data view that allows you to sort of navigate data. And this is the future, folks. Sort of, there's now really the concept of an app almost sort of disappears into the background. And so those are 4 separate things that we want to unify into a single user interface, because why should Urbit have multiple interfaces? And they're all going to work fairly well. And so the question for this demo, it's a demo, but the question for this demo is, can we fit all of these things together into one kind of reasonably usable UI? And does that feel like a compelling experience? Does the login flow feel really like you're just using a centralized website? And the answer is, I think it does. So, nice proof of concept, nice graphic design, kind of having the team work on that has been, I think, excellent and valuable. And I think it shows that, or at least seems to show me, that there's something workable and attractive here. Not, of course, the same thing as a product you can use tomorrow. Certainly, if you're putting a web app on urbit.org, which people type their master ticket into, essentially, again, they're typing, let me repeat that for the benefit of all skeptics, you are typing your seed into a web app. Okay, that means that basically this should, got to check that URL bar. This should only happen for urbit.org. There's an SSO flow. If I put an app that uses the Urbit namespace on a different server, if I do a captive app, you definitely do not type your ticket into some other random website. It should only be urbit.org. And then the people who are maintaining urbit.org need to lock that thing down tremendously. No supply chain attacks, no, almost like basically air gapped. And that's what you need to make that very smooth flow work. But this is designed for a world where not everybody has a hardware wallet. Not everyone, is a crypto freak like, some of us. You can see how you look at that and you're like, yep, that's something normies could use. So, it's a small thing. It's not a huge amount of work. It's sort of nice to show that the Urbit Foundation can, do the basic thing that a demo does and get something done. Let's roll that demo again, so that now that people know what they're looking at, they can.
Yes. With that context, let's watch it again. All right.
All right.
Excellent.
I hope that was a significant, sufficient demonstration of our seriousness. Again, what is the purpose of this demo? We'll figure it out. But I think it's a pretty good demo, and thanks to the whole team for putting that together. Let's move forward into the subject of this this address, which is the governance of Urbit. Now, I made a speech at the recent Urbit subassembly somewhere in a secluded location in the Pacific Northwest. I made a speech on Urbit governance, and I think it was a good speech. It was a fun speech. Perhaps the record of this speech will be released somewhere. Boy, significant shaving error there. Perhaps the result of this speech will be released somewhere. I don't know, but I think before I talk about how Urbit is governed or should be governed, I want to step back a little or step in a little and talk about what we're doing and why we're doing it, because you can't say this stuff too often. So I would say that, the purpose of the Urbit Foundation is to promote the interest, which is, of course, a Cayman Islands foundation. I proposed actually a little while ago, I really hate decentralized workforces, and I proposed that we should all relocate to the U.S. home base, namely the Cayman Islands. And people just ignored me for some reason. I can't understand why. I love the Caymans, but maybe we can do an offsite there at some point. But the purpose of the foundation is, of course, to serve the public good by improving the utility of Urbit. And when I say Urbit, I mean first and foremost the kind of structural anchor of the system we're building, which is not the operating system, but the namespace. And I've had a lot of people, and this is a relatively subtle point, because, one of the unfortunate kind of communication failures that happened in August is people heard this and were like, oh my God, they're jettisoning the operating system. They're jettisoning this incredible Arvo knock, Hoon stack that I spent, literally 11 years alone in my basement building. We are not jettisoning any such thing. We are understanding the dynamics by which such a thing succeeds. And if we don't understand the dynamic, forces that we have to follow in order to succeed, we won't succeed, and we intend to succeed. And let me explain what it means to basically prioritize the namespace. What it means is essentially, we believe that, number one, the world needs a decentralized identity standard, or DID. So there are many competitors for a decentralized identity standard. They range from ENS to WorldCoin to many other things, probably not worth talking about. Let's just use ENS and WorldCoin as excellent examples of systems competing for this title of the key DID system. WorldCoin, of course, is the thing with the orb. You go and get yourself scanned. I was orbed recently. I've been orbed. My soul has been stolen by Sam Altman and his orb machine, and he is busy ranking up installs all around the world. I heard at a presentation that 30% of residents of Buenos Aires already have WorldCoin. So he already has something like 10 million users, which is a lot more than we have. But, are they 10 million? Is it really right to say 10 million users, or should I say 10 million paid installs? Because, of course, the business model right now is that you go out and you take your orb and you get scanned, and the orb operator treats the orb as a piece of capital that is used to generate these submissions. So it's very interesting business model that allows a lot of subsidy. ENS, of course, is very different from this. It's like DNS, but with an A. You register a name like foobar.eth, or a second level name like baz.foobar.eth. We thankfully have acquired urbit.eth, and we'll be putting Urbit names as sargnanpive.urbit.eth simply by writing an ETH resolver. Of course, that ETH resolver can only work if you're on Ethereum L1, which brings up some other questions that we're going to have to talk about, but it's still a very good and useful thing to do. So, how you're like, okay, you're trying to make Urbit names, Urbit numbers, as some would say, the default decentralized identity scheme for essentially the world. Urbit is by no means in the lead in this. We have the very nice property that because Urbit names are not, real world names, they're a lot less easier to handle than ENS names. So you don't really own your ENS name, you rent it, but you sort of rent it the way some vacation properties are rented, where, you get first dibs to rent it this year if you rented it last year. So it's sort of this thing that has to be managed, which is really not quite the same thing as being entirely sovereign. An Urbit name, you buy it once, you're done. So slight advantage. On the other hand, there's a gazillion ENS names out there. They're already being used for social networks like Farcaster, which, by the way, is wonderful. And there's a lot to be said for, in any network, there's a tremendous first mover advantage. So, that's really the case for WorldCoin. Buenos Aires is taking WorldCoin is taking the Argentinians by storm. Everyone will have their WorldCoin name on their soccer jersey, something. And ENS is doing great with Farcaster. So what is Urbit's advantage in the contest to be the standard decentralized identity system? And I think Urbit's advantage is that we know something that nobody else knows, in classic Peter Thiel style. We know something that nobody else knows. And what nobody else knows is that you actually have to build the full stack. And what I mean by the full stack is that when you build an addressing system and you don't connect it to a stack of services, you have given yourself a very hard problem to solve. So here's why the secret ingredient. This is, again, let me repeat this. Urbit names azimuth, we will do everything we can to make them succeed in every possible way because that's our job. But the thing that they have, the thing that we have that no one else has, is that there's an operating system at that address. You can actually route that address without fail to a stack of services. And in fact, if you don't have an Arvo ship running, basically you'll be routed to a service that's a captive service. And the key in this is, like, one of the things I like to say, why is this important? Well, let's say you're on Bitcoin. Okay, let's talk about, Bitcoin addresses, obviously not super easy to remember, and, have some things missing from this. Some of that is rectified by, if you're using an ordinal address, those names are frankly not as good as Urbit names, but not as awful as just a straight up Bitcoin wallet. Let's suppose somebody sends you some Bitcoin dust, a tiny amount of Bitcoin. You look at your Bitcoin thing and you're like, somebody sent me some Bitcoin. Who? Why? Was it Al-Qaeda? Was it like, it's a weird, disturbing thing that happens every once in a while. People spray around Bitcoin dust. You want to know why you got this Bitcoin dust. So you're like, wow, I would love to send a text message to the address that sent me that Bitcoin. You can't. There's no way to do that. Not only is there no way to do that, despite it seeming like an entirely trivial thing, there is no way to do that. And there will probably never be a way to do that, because doing that, although technically it's trivial, would require an act of standardization, which would say, we're going to standardize the idea that every Bitcoin address has a stack of services behind it, like send me a message or send me a phone call. How can I make a phone call to an ENS address? Again, you can't. You can't because basically ENS only standardizes, or WorldCoin for that matter, only standardizes basically part of the stack. They're like, oh, this is a standard address. You can use it for anything. It's sort of like, these kinds of sometimes people will build sort of a cable standard where USB-C kind of has this problem where it's just like, oh, it's a standard cable, but you can run totally different protocols over the cable. So, you plug in the cable, the user experience is you plug in the cable and it doesn't work because the physical connector is right, but the protocol isn't there. And so that's a very hard hump to get over. Let's say, because it's really a huge chicken and egg problem. Let's say you want to associate a services stack. You're like, okay, this is how you should send a message to a Bitcoin address. If you have a Bitcoin wallet, come and sign up for this new service, and it'll be possible to send you a text message. Well, if 1% of Bitcoin wallets basically sign up for this message, relay protocol, which is a very, very, very large number of additional adopters, the result is there's a 99% chance that trying to send a message to any random Bitcoin address is going to fail. So no one will actually bother. Actually, if there's a 20% chance that sending a message to an endpoint will not work, probably no one's going to bother. Similarly, if you can, of course, you could modify Urbit relatively straightforwardly to use addresses that were not, the azimuth Urbit address space. So you could say, what if we basically have modifier networking to use ENS endpoints in some ways rather than Urbit endpoints? Same thing. You basically could say, wow, I got, 1% of all ENS users to install Urbit. That still means 99% of the time when I try to use an ENS address as an Urbit address to access Urbit services, it will fail because nothing will be running there. Whereas if you try to use an Urbit address to access Urbit services, it will work 100% of the time. And so it's really very difficult to have when you're trying to evangelize an addressing scheme without a services stack behind it. It's very, very, very difficult to get adoption of anything that's, an especially usable service. Whereas when your addressing system is bound to your namespace, to your services space, you just don't have that problem. And so again, the killer app for Urbit is realizing that we're a full stack, and that stack extends all the way up to the social layer, because Urbit is very much a society. Urbit is a community, and I think people forget that when you create an addressing system, you are automatically always creating a community. Nobody, when they created internetworking, as it was once called, which is where the name internet comes from, literally internet, because it's a network of smaller local networks. Nobody expected that the internet itself would become a place, would become a culture, would become a way of thinking, would become even, a cult in a way. And certainly even by the mid 1980s, which is slightly before I got into it, that had already happened. And so, let's take, for example, WorldCoin and its immense Argentinian penetration. You've got, 3 million WorldCoin, installs, which are all unique as measured by the orb. These are individual people who were paid in real pesos to basically look into the orb, but to all those people, think of themselves as a WorldCoin community. Do they think of let's try to translate it into, are they mundialistas? How does that work? No, they basically did a paid install and put an app on their phone and forgot about it until the point when they're going through their apps and they're like, oh, why do I still have this on my phone? And then they delete it. So, it's actually achieved a lot of illusory penetration, but in terms of achieving actually kind of deep penetration to people, where people feel genuinely engaged with the addressing scheme, again, bonding with your Urbit planet, and sort of entering the Urbit world is a very different experience from that. And that's why we have the best decentralized identity schema there. And frankly, that's why we're going to win. But let me step forward a little bit into the process of evangelizing this namespace. So, because doing the engineering and social work of evangelizing this namespace is, again, what the Urbit Foundation is for. Now, some of the things that the foundation is working on now are obviously my idea. Some of these things are obviously not my idea, because this is not like the set of amazing people involved in this system is really tremendous. And I think the first thing that we're really, it's like, what is the UF doing about the blockchain? What is your blockchain plan? What is your token plan, in as much as it is? And I think the first thing in recent days, after some, a lot of back and forth, we're coming up with the first thing that we want to push out to the blockchain, which is essentially a two-way multi-bridge. This was actually not my idea. This was jointly invented by Sarsen Sarlev and Master Mulwile. And, sort of at the same time independently, which always tells you there's something good going on here. And the idea is very, very simple. The idea is that Urbit names are a global standard resource, and the Urbit namespace should be available, at least planets in the Urbit namespace. We'll keep galaxies and maybe stars on Ethereum L1, but the Urbit namespace should be available on any consensus mechanism that you want, or even new ones that have not been built yet. So, for example, there's a bunch of very, very interesting. I saw it very well presented at Urbit Subassembly. The technical intelligence here is really, like, very, very, very impressive to me. The presentation I saw was very impressive, both for the quality of the work and the quality of the presentation, to be honest. Were both really top notch and really, really impressed me. And this is basically, putting Urbit names originally just for comets on Bitcoin, specifically attaching them to the brilliant creation of Casey Rodamore Bitcoin ordinals. And as I watched this, of course, I thought the obvious thinking, wow, this is a great idea. Why restrict it to comets? So you should absolutely be able to take your Urbit planet to Bitcoin. If you get tired of that, you should absolutely be able to bring it back. What to do with the existing L2 naive rollup is, that, of course, exists as it is. We'll need some actual contract, Senate authorized contract changes to bring those L2 planets and stars back into the system. But there's that's not an emergency. There's plenty of time for that. But this multi-bridge that we're designing will be brought into the system with a standard UIP process. We're going back to democracy here. We've had enough weird backroom fighting between oligarchy and monarchy. It's time to get everything out in the air. So we'll be developing this under the Urbit improvement process, and it will provide bridges, two-way bridges with galaxies as oracles from Urbit to any other chain. It will also provide a planet fungification protocol of some sort, so that planets will be converted one-to-one to a fungible token, which you'll also be able to move around between chains. This is our only, concession to the new token, desire, which I guess I'll speak about next. This is not really a new. First of all, this is not really a new token in any sense. Secondly, the Urbit Foundation itself is probably not introducing any kind of new token. We're just basically identifying the technical standards through which someone might choose to do so. Probably someone European. And work on these technical designs as well within our province. But I'm not sure about actually doing anything. So that's essentially that multi-bridge concept, multi-bridge with planet fungifier looks like what we're moving toward. Again, one of the benefits of this design is that it is not actually an update to even the existing Urbit L1 Ethereum contract. It's simply a new contract. Now, of course, Arvo will have to reference that contract if you basically, to go out to collect that data onto Urbit itself, you have to go and actually talk to that thing. And you have to understand the bridge. And if a planet is on Solana, let's say, or Base or Bitcoin or Zenith or any other network, you'll actually have to go and talk to the chain for that network to chase down that thing. Because if you just look at it on L1 Ethereum, it will look like that planet, which is actually migrated, just belongs to the bridging contract. So, nothing super revolutionary or rocket science-y there, but we think we have some pretty good designs. And, as usual, when we work on designs over here at the Urbit Foundation, they get simpler over time, kind of like that famous picture of Elon's rocket motor. So hopefully, it's simple enough that we can send it through a committee and make it not too complicated to live. So that's kind of, beyond the demo stuff. That's the stuff we're working on at the token level. And if there's anything that we wind up basically proposing as a change to the main contracts, we still might wind up proposing basically a quota structure that limits the number of planets stars can release over time, so that we spread out on the principle that the party always starts in the kitchen. We say, instead of a star being able to issue all of its planets now, it can issue 5% of them this year, 10% next year, something up to 50 years. Again, I'm not saying we're going to propose this. We need to have a bunch more conversations, but it's certainly one direction that we're considering, because I think it alters the dynamics of the address space in a good way. I do want to, as for the question of why we're pursuing this, and the question of, to anticipate some of the conversation about governance, Urbit is a really, really complicated mix of Aristotle's three forms of governance: democracy, monarchy, and oligarchy. And people who basically saw this kind of beautiful design of Urbit as a digital republic, I think, may have been, and perhaps rightly so, sort of shocked by the appearance of what Churchill called two bulldogs wrestling under a carpet. Like, why is monarchy and oligarchy suddenly fighting in the back rooms in this thing that was supposed to be a democratically self-governed community? And the answer, of course, is that there's no world in which all three forms are not present. They are always all present. And in particular, I think I'm ready to say a little bit more about why this happened and why I got pulled back in to this, because I got pulled back in as a result of basically I got pulled back in to prevent the launch of a kind of new divergent token. And let me, explain basically my concerns with issuing a new token. But first, let's basically steelman it by making the case for a new token. The case for a new token is, number one, we have address space. Since the peak, I think a star costs $33,000. Lately, they've been trading for under half an ETH, so they've fallen by a factor of roughly 50. In fact, the market is relatively frozen. Stars are, in fact, hard to liquidate. You know, and so from the perspective of people who've been watching that market trend, whether they're outsiders or insiders, it really looks like a failing system. Um, in fact, they say on Wall Street, never catch a falling knife, but I believe it's entirely possible to fix this situation. But, you know, I haven't proven anything, so watch this space. That's sort of point number one, is basically your ability when you have something that has a lot of name recognition like Urbit, you could pretty much just launch a Solana meme coin called Urbit. And that would be its only connection to Urbit. And as a meme coin, I think that meme coin would do pretty well. And that was not, of course, at all the plan that was being, you know, for a new token. The plan for a new token was considerably more sophisticated than that and sort of quite respectable. And, you know, to go over basically, you know, reasons for a new token, again, let's make the case for this idea first. Um, the second point is that basically the idea that the only consensus state, the only public shared state that Urbit will ever have is just the PKI, the stars, galaxies, planets, um, seems relatively unlikely. It seems quite probable that Urbit will want to have its own shared consensus state, whatever that state is. For example, one of the purposes that has been proposed there is basically signing bindings in the Urbit namespace such that you can tell that a ship cannot change its mind about a name value binding. Name value binding, sort of like when, you know, like those bindings are like, you know, URL to web page, except that they're supposed to be immutable. So imagine if a URL always produced the same web page. They're supposed to be immutable, but how do you know they are? It may be an attack for that to be mutable. It may be an attack for a ship to lie and give one name value binding to one in one direction and one in another. All of these things can be solved with consensus space. And that's another argument. And yet a third argument is basically when you look at the distribution of Urbit address space, it's extremely old, it's extremely random, it is not, you know, does not match who deserves what to any obvious level. You know, for example, there's a whole maybe like, I don't know, 10, 15 galaxies, something like that, who got galaxies because of a random blog post I made in, you know, 2007 or 8 or something, where I was like, here's my knock interpreter. If you write a decrement in knock, you'll receive a special prize. And the special prize turned out to be, you know, a galaxy, which at its peak was worth quite a bit and is still worth quite a bit and will, I hope, someday be worth quite a bit more. And, you know, so this result, none of the people who asked for this prize knew that they could be winning anything anywhere near so valuable. Some of the people who got the prize have sold it. Some of the people have not sold it. And what I was sort of trying to reproduce in the Urbit Galaxy table was sort of this wide distribution among people where you look at it and you actually can't say there's any structure of fairness of who owns what. It's actually very arbitrary. In other words, it's very like the way real world assets are distributed, where basically kind of the essence of a libertarian system of property is the fact that you own something as a fact. You don't own something because you own it. You actually own it. And so the way to sort of secure that in kind of a moral sense is to actually have people in your ownership record who actually don't deserve it, who don't deserve it at all. And yet, basically, the fact that because of the fact that they own it, even though they never deserve this windfall in any way, shape, or form, their ownership of that part of the system is just as secure as someone who owns it because they worked very hard for it. For example, one of the things that I did when I left Tlon was that I basically kept only stars. I basically took all of my naked galaxies and, without being asked to do this in any way, shape, or form, gave them back to the company to give them to core developers, essentially. So, and again, nobody asked me to do that. I was like, I actually just, my main goal was to not have any power at all in the Senate. And I think I was justified in doing that. And because I think the only proper way for me to basically do what I'm doing in here is just kind of offer my services as a volunteer without having any power at all. And so, like, the Urbit Foundation is not currently paying me, for example. I have no way to coerce it. I have no shares in Tlon Corporation. I have no Urbit Galaxies. I have no power at all. I'm just simply a humble citizen. And, that, of course, maximizes my moral authority. That's the way these things work. And I need every bit of that moral authority, let me tell you, because this is a complicated and difficult, political governance situation. And so, when you basically look at the idea, when you look at the fact that Urbit real estate is not distributed in any way that's fair and is not an attempt to equally reward contributors, you basically, come to this question of, still, suppose we could reboot the address space, give an FU to all the people that hold it now, launch a new token, maybe, and this new token will be distributed to people who actually work on the project and can benefit from it. And in terms of like incentives, like, this is not an idea to be thrown out the window. This is an idea to be treated seriously. And my response to that serious idea is that basically, when you compare the distribution of the ancient and weird distribution of the Urbit namespace, and you compare it to the ancient and weird distribution of the Bitcoin namespace, certainly the question, there's something very pleasingly non-manual about the distribution of the Bitcoin namespace going to, like, some dude who was on some crypto mailing list, like, in 2008, and did a bunch of Bitcoin mining in the right place in the right time, and now has 32 mansions around the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know that person deserves that really anymore. And I do know that the Bitcoin development is done on an open source basis, which, sort of, Urbit isn't necessarily exactly there, but I'm very confident that, if all structured organizations developing Urbit disappeared, Urbit would continue to exist on an open source basis, which is, for the lawyers out there, kind of the point of the Howey test. Does it depend on a centralized organization, or has its value become truly independent? Obviously, its value, I think it's obvious that it's become truly independent. And much like Ethereum, for example. And so this is a project which is fun enough to work on that people will work on it for free. And still more, the fact that people will work on something for free doesn't mean they're really working for free. It means they're working for something else. They're working for self-actualization. They're working for, perhaps status in their professional careers, but they're not working entirely for money. And, what's, of course, even better than working for free is working for a salary and actually being paid to work on something that's super awesome and fun to work for. So, to the extent that basically you present this design as like, here's something that Urbit needs, I'm basically like, well, I think that actually Bitcoin Core development is actually, considering that our horrific tangle of code that we call Bitcoin Core, is actually considerably more thankless than doing sort of real world operating systems research in a novel, purely functional operating system. And yet, I think that if, like, Peter Todd and Luke Jr. and the rest of the core Bitcoin team were to say, okay, we need to launch a new token so that we can get paid like all of our friends in crypto, they would not be treated well by the Bitcoin community. And so, yeah, that's, so when I look at sort of all of these arguments for we need a new token for some reason, I basically see like, you know, when I look at the technical argument for a new token, I'm like, okay, yes, Urbit could use a new chain, could use a consensus mechanism in some ways. We don't really to say, okay, we need this consensus mechanism to secure the Urbit namespace. I'm like, well, we barely use the Urbit namespace at the moment. We would like to use it a bunch more in future. We do not understand exactly how we are going to be using it. We do not understand the structure of the attacks on it. And therefore, we're basically building something that's essentially a security mechanism, essentially first. And we're building a security mechanism, which when we don't have a threat model, which is something you're not supposed to do in a security world. Moreover, when we basically imagine the creation of this new token and see it, of course, as a fundraising tool, as a way to raise money for developers in enhancing Urbit, okay, fine, well enough. But if something is a fundraising tool, it had better kind of have a firm financial structure backing it up, because the last thing we want to be associated with here at Urbit is some kind of like shitcoin built on smoke and mirrors. We don't absolutely do that. I would never want the name of this thing associated with basically anything that came, even close to being anything like that. And so you have to really make sure the economic model there is solid at the very least. And so when you kind of look at the economic model of let's launch a new chain as a way of funding this thing, you're like, okay, so your new chain, first of all, you're in the space of what I call if you're not following my Twitter articles, I think I'm the only person that uses X articles, but I kind of like them nonetheless. If you go to Pat Sarg Namtaev on X, aka Twitter, you'll see a bunch of articles, and one of them is the latest one is called 5 Kinds of Coins. It's my theory of coins. And you're definitely building something that's essentially a yield coin. You're building something, the token of this kind is a token whose price has to be justified by its yield. And of course, staking for yield farming, et cetera, has become a relatively large thing in the token world. And, herein lies my concern, because I see a lot of tokens that pay various kinds of yield, often very high yields, often double-digit percentages, 40, 50% is not unheard of. Levels of you might even call them high yield investment programs, except that word is already taken by Ponzi scams. An HYIP is a Ponzi, except that an HYIP actually pays its yield in like cash, whereas I don't think they often have the gall to pay their yield in their own shares. And so, you're entering into this economy where I think the only one of these yield bearing coins where the yield actually comes from fees being paid by users for useful services is really Ethereum staking itself. And of course, everyone who's paying those Ethereum fees is actually trying to migrate from L1 Ethereum to L2s. So, the certainty of those fees remaining is not so great. And when you look at essentially, okay, what's going to pay the fees on an Urbit chain coin, I'm like, okay, where does that come from? Because either it comes from like smoke and mirrors, crypto magic fairy dust, which the market has not showing a lot of patience for at the moment, or it comes from what are the economic transactions on this chain? Well, one kind of economic transaction is buying a planet. So if you basically are looking for a reasonable market capitalization with a coin like this, of course, you can calculate the yield from that. And you can imagine, let's say there's a $5 tax, let's call it what it is, a $5 cost to issue a new planet, which is going into these fees. How many new planets are created here, even in a moment of like, super scaling, ultra fast growth. Like, I think 1,000, 10,000 planets a day is pretty impressive. Those numbers don't become very large if you translate them into capital numbers. Moreover, the whole point of building an L2 was to get away from the rent is too damn high on Ethereum, because Ethereum is taxing you in Ethereum fees to create a planet, which is most of the things that people do with peak AI operations. So, then a second alternative for the sorts of fees is, you're like, okay, what if we've already raised the possibility of what if this chain is used to register scribe bindings, namespace bindings? I'm like, okay, I can imagine a world in which it's worth paying a cost to register a scribe binding, but that's a very loose, open-ended imagination, and it's very hard to translate that. I can't even imagine it very concretely. I can imagine it only abstractly, and it's very hard to project any yield from that, and that yield might well be zero. And then the other source of fees to justify this yield is to say, well, Urbit is a decentralized system that uses this token, and people, as they do on, for example, Telegram, would like to send each other money in this token in an Apple Cash or Telegram Ton kind of way. And so we can charge a fee on that. And the proposal I saw, I'm sure, things have changed. I don't think it's the latest. In the proposal I saw, they had a 5% tax on those transactions, where I'm like, well, I can kind of see a number like that on Telegram, which is not a general purpose operating system, which can basically force you to use this token, which is taxed. But in Urbit, in which every Urbit is a wallet, I don't really see why people wouldn't just pay each other in USDC. And, so again, I'm basically like, I really question that source of funding. I mean, in general, when you're basically projecting income from fees, the historical example it always reminds me of is actually most people don't know this, but the American Revolution was in fact largely due to high blockchain fees. I'm not making this up. It's hard, hard to get a good laugh pause when you're talking to the void like this. But I repeat, the American Revolution was largely caused by high blockchain fees, because one of the key royal measures that incurred the dislike of the provincials was the Stamp Act. And if you look at what the Stamp Act was, it required all legal transactions, in other words, all blockchain transactions on the paper blockchain of the 1800s, had to be issued on specially stamped paper that the king charged a fee on. This was a way of taxing people through taxing every legal action that they took. In other words, it was a blockchain fee, and it pissed people off, and they didn't want to pay it. And so, when I basically summarize, the question of, okay, we're introducing a new chain token, I summarize this question, and I'm basically like, for this token, first of all, when you're introducing a new divergent asset, you are clearly deprecating your existing asset, whether or not you actually physically do some kind of rug pull sale or not. You're definitely invoking rug pull energy. So you're sort of betting the project in a way on this new token that you're creating. And what are the factors required for this new token to succeed economically? The factors are, number one, people actually have to use the network. It has to succeed as a social network, which is also the factor required for address space itself to succeed. To be, as I put it in my 5 kinds of coins essay, a land coin. Then after that, you need it to succeed not only as a social network, but a commercial network on which people are making financial transactions. And finally, that you have to basically somehow convince people to make those financial transactions on a high fee blockchain. This strikes me as a really, really difficult thing to actually succeed in. Is it possible to sell a coin and bring in a bunch of money in meme coin style? Yeah, you can, but the thing is that money is not free, and I don't think that the kinds of large investors that would go for that proposition are necessarily the best investors that we could possibly get. And dealing with lower quality investors is very, very dangerous. And so, there's also the question of, again, does Urbit need a consensus mechanism of its own? Will it need a consensus mechanism of its own someday? Yeah, it very likely will. It might or it might not. There are things you can do with trusted computing. I urge, if you fire up your browser and go to Apple, recently released something where they talk about how they do private computing just for the purposes of AI, but like managing your data so that nothing that isn't you can chew on it. Apple has a really great backend solution for this. This solves a lot of the same problems that Urbit having its own consensus mechanism would solve. So it's not clear which of those things wins out technically, maybe both. I don't know, but it's premature, from a technical standpoint. Furthermore, when I look at designing a consensus mechanism for Urbit, this is a very appealing thing. But I realize that basically the kind of hybrid, sort of proof of authority, proof of stake structure that you get just by using galaxies as validators, um, which is clearly, which is, but, using galaxies as validators is number one, an element of the token proposal that I saw. Using galaxies as oracles, and by the way, collecting all the oracle, all the bridging fees for the multi-bridge that I designed is also correct. Galaxies just make an excellent validator or oracle because they're just sort of intrinsically heavy in an economic sense. And I would love to see a chain with galaxies and validators. My feeling is that what that chain, should it come to exist, will be shooting for will not to be a high fee chain that provides economic value. I think we're actually looking at a low fee or perhaps even zero fee chain. Someone came up with the term consensus too cheap to meter. I think we can do consensus too cheap to meter within the Urbit world, and that will be a great consensus mechanism, but it will not be a great funding mechanism. And these are the reasons why obviously I can't prevent people from uploading their own new token, but this is why I think it's really important to kind of rehabilitate the economic structure of the Urbit address space, because I think that's it remains fundamental to how Urbit works, despite its many disadvantages and imperfections, among which I think the main again, it's perfectly true that if you look at how many galaxies the Urbit Foundation has, I think it's like it's roughly 10% of the total supply. They teach you at Startup 101, never give away your equity. And, obviously Urbit address space is not equity, but it's a little equity like. And I'm just like, yeah, but you know what? If you shit on your existing, I'm sorry, this is a family podcast. If you deprecate your existing asset structure, um, everyone who gets involved in a new asset basically knows, oh, wow, they did that before, they handed out haircuts before, and it will probably be my turn to get my haircut at some point. So I better dump before that happens. And you're sort of entering this spiral of like, more and more scammy crypto blockchain stuff, and like staying out of that spiral and like being something real, and like being like Urbit never did. One of the reasons why we don't have a $200 million treasury is that Urbit never did a classic ICO. We were never like pigs at the trough, and that was for regulatory reasons, that was for aesthetic and moral reasons. I think one of the things that I don't think like my yeah, I mean, I could go on to about the Mos Eisley of finance that is the crypto world, but all that means is that just as in any other market, whether it's startups or whatever, most things are crap. Most things are going to fail. Don't worry about it. Just concentrate on building something real. And concentrating and building something real is, I think, what everyone involved in the Urbit ecosystem believes in. Some may ask, basically, I call this like a wartime address. Obviously, nobody's shooting anyone. It was just sort of a funny comment on, the classic wartime CEO terminology beloved by startup people. But, the back rooms, as some say, still exist, and basically eliminating the only way for backroom diplomacy to stop existing or stop mattering in the space of Urbit is very simple. It's for the backroom diplomacy to actually succeed. So the problem of basically kind of bringing all of the players and investors and developers together on one solution is ongoing. I feel really optimistic about that process. It's going well. I think it's too early to say anything else. But I'm definitely optimistic about that. And in a way, it's still like, the most important, problem to solve. I mean, when I was a newbie, before I got involved in like startup world, as a kid 15 years ago, I'm basically like, what is this concept of a round? Like, why do you raise in rounds? Like, can't you just, borrow money from anyone at any time? And what you learn is that raising happens in rounds because the process of fundraising is so disruptive to any kind of normal operation of a company. Obviously, we're not a company. We're a Cayman Islands Foundation intended to benefit the world, but we kind of look like a company if you squint at it the wrong way. And raising is so disruptive to the operations of a company. I can't even tell you. So, let's put all of these pieces back together and get back to governing in public. That's where I think everyone wants to be. And, it feels to me like the prospect of getting there is very, very reasonable at this point. But, let's, just because something is hard doesn't mean you don't have to do it. And so, yes, it is hard to plan for the future, especially considering the range of different outcomes while in the fundraising, or as some call it, fundraising process. Doesn't mean we're not doing it. And part of that effort that you saw is the demo that you just saw, which I think is it's a pretty good demo considering the resources that we had, to produce it. And does the video a little bit hacked? Yeah, the video is a little bit hacked. But do we have a system that basically does that? Yeah, I think the thing that's most hacked is the passkey. The passkey stuff is not quite ready. But that's like a matter of like a couple of weeks. But everything else that you see there basically works. And I think it's neat. And so my objective in doing that was to show the demo and basically help it inform kind of planning moving forward. And we're now doing various kinds of planning moving forward. So to talk about the planning moving forward, and I promise I will get to the subject. I realize this has been long. This is taking up your whole evening. You're like, what about the governance, Curtis? What about the governance? Didn't I log on? I hate it. Why are you going through all of these details? Let's talk about some abstract political science. We will, but not yet. So, one of the questions we recently brought on a new person at the management level, a very impressive resume, awesome guy. And, he had but not somebody with an Urbit background really at all. And it's sort of nice to have some outside talent in here because we get too insular easily, but bringing in a bunch of randos to MBA ourselves into existence is not what is going to happen here, however much money we have. So as a part of that onboarding process, he was basically like, okay, let's just tell it straight, how are you going to get users? The ultimate question, the great question of the San Francisco Bay Area, how are you going to get users? And if you read my Twitter articles, I would basically define where we are in the how are you going to get users question, I would say that strictly speaking at the moment, Urbit has 0 users because we have people who use the system, but they are not users, they are fans. And that they are fans means that they are excited by the amazing potential of this thing. They can smell it, they can see it, they can imagine a world where everyone is on Urbit. And it's tremendously exciting to be in a revolution like that, even a potential revolution like that. It's tremendously exciting to be part of it. And once you see it, you're just like, people just fall into this rabbit hole and they will never come out. They want to spend the rest of their lives on this thing. They're passionate about it. But you know what? They would use it even if they're so passionate about it, they would use it even if it sucked. It doesn't completely suck. It just like sucks in kind of some ways. And if you come in without that fan energy, our friend Casey Rodamore recently somewhere he evaluated a bunch of decentralized systems, and Casey is a very smart person, and I'm not sure that he recorded this video in an entirely sober state, which makes his analysis of Urbit, which is utterly unsparing and extremely unfair in some ways and fair in other ways, but is absolutely worth seeing. He's not inspired by fan energy, even though Casey will say that Bitcoin ordinals are somewhat inspired by Urbit. They are, but they're not Urbit. And he really rips us a new cloaca, and that's as it should be. And so that's the problem with basically when your users are fans, they're not using the thing. They're using the thing because they want it to exist. And so I said to this guy, David, I was like, basically, he's like, what makes personal servers as a necessity? I'm like, take the part of this where you're saying it's a necessity as a public good, where you're saying the world needs Urbit, the world needs decentralized identities, needs decentralized computing, or it's just going to fall into like some kind of centralized disaster space. We all agree with that. Forget about it, because it's something that only motivates fans. It doesn't motivate users. And that's a really, really important point. 100% sure that Galen over at Tlon, my fellow monarch, completely agrees with this. And it's just a really important, like, you can't drink your own Kool-Aid and make a system like this. This is not a lifestyle business. This is a startup. This is it's life or death. It's we got to win. And so let's throw out all of the fan stuff. Now, the fans, it doesn't mean, we're throwing out the community. Users still get their start by being seeded by fans. Fans are tremendous marketers. But really, it's not even, you could say, okay, how does Urbit get users? I don't think even that is the right question. I think that's absolutely the wrong question. Getting users is the easy part. The hard part is deserving users. Let me say that again. The hard part is deserving users. So the question is basically, how do we make an Urbit that is mature enough that it deserves users? One example of this in terms of user adoption, I forget his name, the Superhuman founder. It's an email client. This is basically one of Silicon Valley's leading growth hackers. And growth hacking is a disgusting thing that we all have to do sometimes. And Superhuman is this disgusting product that uses tracking pixels and all kinds of things that are considered totally unethical by old internet standards. And boy, did he do a good job of growth hacking. And one of the things the Superhuman, founder says is basically, here's how you can tell that you have a product that deserves users. You go out, you put it on a test population, and you ask them, the only question that matters in the survey is, would you be mad if you had to stop using this? And once 40% of the people who you send your survey to are just like, oh my God, you cannot take this away from me. What the hell? You have a product that's ready to ship. And until then, keep working on it. And so actually making a system that deserves that kind of user base. That's what really matters. And it has to deserve it at every level of the stack, from the interpreter up through the operating system, up through the user interface. Of course, now as the captive app thing develops, you can build, you can fake it. You can build something that looks like a decentralized Urbit app, works like a decentralized Urbit app, but is built with totally conventional centralized technologies. But still, that's only an interim stopgap. All those centralized things will have to be, migrated onto people's real Urbits, and probably that prototyping mechanism will just get turned off in like 10 years or something, because nobody will be using it anymore. But I have a feeling that if my job was just to build an app that used Urbit identities, probably right now I would start with a captive app. Where I'm not doing decentralized. Captive app means I'm not doing decentralized computing. I'm just doing decentralized identity. But it looks the same, and you can migrate there, easily. And so, okay, what are the application directions to basically push on, in this direction? And I would say, again, let's take this problem from the top down. So we're basically going through general principles that nobody can really argue with. So I would say that there are basically, when I look at actual tools within Urbit that drive people to that magic thing where they're just like, I need this, I can't give it up. What the hell? Why are you taking it away from me? That's the magic answer that you want when you're asking people to really use a product. And here are the principles for doing that. First of all, I would say that on a new platform, there is no way to ask users to use an experience unless it has already been pounded on by developers, by the people building the system. So what you want to say is, I'm using this amazing thing. Like, I love it. Why can't people, outside Tlon or the Urbit Foundation or these little fan groups, I want to be using a thing where I'm just like, wow, everyone wants this, but they can't have it. How do I fix that? And that only comes from, it's called dog fooding. I don't know why it's called dog fooding. Using your own product. Nobody eats their own, no dog. The CEO of Purina does not eat his own dog food. So that's a weird, use of language. But basically, dog fooding is essential. So, for example, one of the huge problems with Urbit today, in my view, not from the direct standpoint of is this useful to users, but from the maturity of the system standpoint. If you told me 5 years ago, when I left Urbit, that Urbit would still be using GitHub to develop its own source code, I definitely would have cried. Because actually, that sense of owning your own data, if you don't own your own code, like what? Every time someone in our organization or in Urbit world, uses GitHub, posts a GitHub gist, uses Google Calendar to set up meetings, uses even Gathered@Town, which is kind of cool retro thing that we use to basically decide where you are. Every time this is being done, it's just like Urbit is losing this tremendous source of strength that it gets from using its own tools. So, in a world where, everyone knows the potential of this thing and we have the unlimited resources that we deserve, obviously in reality, people are idiots. And so we have to make compromises. But in an ideal world, basically, actually, the first thing we concentrated on would be basically this dog fooding structure of using our own shit. Depending on how that works, some compromises may have to be made, but it's a really, really important point. That said, let's dive into the kinds of things that we can do for real people who have real needs, who don't actually really care that much about, the ideal vision of Urbit, who just want to live their lives and get shit done. So when you have a powerful new product that's based on its own operating system, it's obvious, there are two sort of ways to go. One of the ways to go is to say, well, this is a relatively new thing, so let's concentrate on an even and relatively low level of functionality and go for sort of normal users. And the other direction is to go for power users. I believe that basically the first users across the board who are users and not fans will be very much power users. I say this because basically hitting an ordinary level of user, the ordinary level of user expects the tool to solve almost all of their ordinary problems. They expect that to be done with an extraordinary level of polish, and those levels are hard and expensive to hit. A power user is looking for the system to do one of a much larger set of powerful things. The sets of powerful things that different power users expect varies a lot between users, and they are comfortable with a lower level of polish in exchange for power. They are comfortable with systems that do only some of the powerful things that they expect, and sometimes need to be extended to do other things. They are comfortable often writing these extensions, and it's essentially really the right course in kind of navigating through the user world to get the power users first and then worry about the kind of smoothness that it takes to get, regular users. And let me give a very simple example of that from the perspective of, okay, you're building a personal server. Well, a personal server obviously has your personal data on it. And one of the things that's very important in your personal data is contacts and calendars. So, okay, first of all, just about everyone listening to this basically has contacts and calendars through iCloud and or Gmail. You probably have Apple contacts and Apple calendaring, and that is probably connecting to your Google Calendar. Not a huge problem, as these things have APIs, or at least the calendars have APIs. Let's put that aside for a moment and say, what do I want as a user? Well, what do I want as a user is I want iCloud and Gmail. But what do I want as a power user? When you go into power user world, you find that it's harder to find these tools, to find like deep tools. I would say what I want, being me, is much closer to something that you might call a personal CRM. For example, like common problem in my life is I just flew into Austin. Who do I know in Austin? Hell will freeze over before my iPhone answers that question for me. And so what I really want is basically essentially a personal, whereas if I'm a sales guy and I'm like, who are my sales leads who are in Austin, any CRM that didn't solve that problem would very shortly cease to exist. And so, this market of like a personal CRM is an example of something, an app, a power user app that has trouble existing because it really deserves to be part of an integrated platform that has all of my data. So you start to see already like, yeah, if I would use it, I would hook that up right away for me, for my own purposes, if I had that tooling available on Urbit. Okay. And like those are the kind of things where basically when you're building software to fulfill your own needs, you're cooking with gas. You're always cooking with gas because somebody will always have those same kinds of needs. They're not imaginary needs, they're real needs. You're not fooling yourself into believing people need something they don't need. You need it yourself. And it's just far easier to product manage on that basis. Of course, again, that data is not exclusive to your personal server. You're still going to have an iPhone. You're still going to have Gmail. And that basically brings me to the sort of the three kind of categories of application that I think we see in this kind of next stage of Urbit when it's breaking out of fan space and into true user space. The three kinds of application are parasitic, single player, and multiplayer. So the kind of parasitic, the example of the kind of parasitic tool is it's an application space that I hope I'm not violating any trademarks here of people I love and respect, but essentially personal Palantir. So what Palantir is really good at, in case you don't know what Palantir is, it's a very, very large corporation which regularly appears in conspiracy theories, but actually they just write a bunch of IT software, and they're just really good at IT software. And what they specialize in is very heterogeneous worlds where there's a whole bunch of data sets out there. How do we basically bring them together, visualize them in a unified way, consolidate them, connect to them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so you've got like intelligence services buy it because they've got 50 zillion data sets for like Al Qaeda alone, and they want to like ask you questions like, where in the world is Osama bin Laden, right? Classic CRM kind of stuff, except it's like, enemy relationship management or something. I don't know. And terrorist relationship management. And so the user of a new personal server has a similar problem, which is that his or her personal data is all scattered around all these application servers everywhere. You've got your contacts data in Apple, you've got your calendar data in Google, you've got your bicycle data in Strava, you've got all kinds of little data pools everywhere. And one of the big jobs of a young personal server, before you can move the master copy of this data, eventually you want the master copy of everything to be living on your personal server. But at first, the problem is just, how do you connect to it? How do you basically maintain that connection to your own data elsewhere? Now, some of this connecting may use documented APIs. Some of this connection may, YouTube DL style, use undocumented APIs. Undocumented APIs are beautiful things. Of course, they change rather frequently and need to be updated. You might want a system like Urbit that's really, really good at high-speed software updates so that you basically don't notice that stuff. Some of the, you might even be scraping. You certainly have to update your scrapers pretty often. And so the work of turning your personal server into like a personal Palantir that goes around and chases down your data, it's highly parallelizable, as from a development standpoint. It works very well with like grant funding programs. You basically just have a bunch of like device drivers essentially for these random foreign websites. And again, the operators of these websites might say you're doing something evil by parasitizing them. My view is that parasites are just a normal, healthy part of the ecosystem. The word is a slur, but it's more symbiotic than, there could be some commensalism here. Parasite is a dirty word, but I used it. So that's one kind of app. The second kind of app when I say app, of course, I mean way of using your personal server, is single player mode. And things that are in single player mode are basically things where they would be useful even if no one else used them. And so here we get into a space where, again, for a casual user, for example, there's Apple Notes. But for a non-casual power user, there's something like Roam, Obsidian, Notion. Even, Notion is really a personal server, although it's actually a collective thing. It's like Notion is sort of an example of a captive app in some ways, where it's like a personal server, but it's not actually personal, but it feels like a personal server. So there's a lot of depth that you can go down into in having, I want to manage my data in rich and intelligent ways. I want something that's basically like a personal creative archive of all of the work that I create. I also would have been amazed to learn that in 2024, there's no generally accepted 64-bit Urbit VM, but because it'd be sure nice to store like images and stuff. I don't know. We'll get there. We're almost there. And what I really, and this of course also relates to like source code. What I want is kind of a permanent a personal creative archive that stores everything from bookmarks on the links I like, notes in a Rome Zettelkasten kind of style, documents, of course, source code, raw footage of interviews, like everything that I generate should be going by default into a very, very well managed, well curated personal creative archive. And that's basically, again, a very deep space that you can go into in the single player mode space. Finally, the third mode, and so my code names for the parasitic thing are Argus, obviously, for the thing that watches the Web 2 world with 100 eyes, the parasitic mode, and the moving all of your personal data into this is Hijira, after, of course, Muhammad's flight from Mecca to Medina. And the third thing, the multiplayer mode, this is Urbit as a social network, is Utopia. These are just stupid names I came up with. They could be changed. They don't mean anything. And the idea of Utopia is basically that the world needs to re-experience the greatness that I achieved literally in the 1980s on Usenet. And Usenet was a genuinely decentralized system of, topical conversations, not unlike Reddit today, except that comparing, Usenet in 1990 to Reddit today is like comparing ancient Athens to Luanda, Angola, right? I mean, there's good stuff. There are beautiful neighborhoods in Luanda, although they tend to be quite expensive. There are also a lot of slums and shanty towns and just places where you would never want to go. And the same is true of Reddit. If you compare Usenet to Reddit sort of head to head in the same kinds of discussion groups, you will see that the quality of Usenet was, I don't know how, you can't measure quality. Quality is not amenable to measuring in numbers, but the quality of ordinary, like, hobby interest groups, the signal quality of ordinary hobby interest groups on Usenet, which had 2 orders of magnitude fewer users, if not 3, than Reddit, was an order of magnitude higher. It was, Hacker News is in general the best sort of conversation system on the internet today, I think, at least for smart people. Who else do you want to see conversing? Let's be honest. And Usenet and was easily as much better than Hacker News as Hacker News is better than Reddit. And so you're basically faced with a question, and this is sort of because most people, when they want to create social networks, are basically, obviously, they've seen, the Mark Zuckerberg film. They're like, a lot of money to be made here. $1 million isn't cool. What's cool is $1 billion. Actually, I'm not even sure $1 billion is cool anymore. I think what's cool is $1 trillion. And so when you're looking at the value of a full stack network that everyone in the world uses, I think we're talking about the 4 commas club. So what do you have to do to make it to the 4 commas club in terms of building a social network? The obvious answer is get as many users as possible. I think this answer is completely wrong. It's an obvious answer. It's what everyone in Silicon Valley wants to do. It is wrong. The reason it is wrong is related to the reason why Facebook beat MySpace. If you remember, I guess you have to be ancient like me to remember this. There was a time when Facebook had 1,000 users and MySpace had 50 million users, and yet Facebook was objectively more valuable than MySpace, and whoever paid hundreds of million. Rupert Murdoch bought MySpace for $500 million or something, and it was not the best $500 million ever spent. Why was Facebook worth more than MySpace when it had 1,000 users and MySpace had 50 million? It was because those 1,000 users were at Harvard. Sorry, I'm not a huge Harvard fan, as some of you may know, but reality is what it is. And what Facebook was relying on was a principle that I can't repeat too often, which is the principle that the quality of a network can only decline because people want to join a space of people cooler than them and not less cool than them. And because the quality of a network can only decline, you really want to grow a network in a breadth first search downward from the point of highest quality. Because whenever you get low quality users or low quality content into your system and you don't have all of the people higher than those low quality users are not already on the system, you're going to be driving some of those people away. If you start with sort of medium quality, you'll never go higher than that. And it's very easy to, I think, Gab and Blue Sky in different ways have both suffered very, very badly in terms of the quality of their user bases from this choice. And so, so when you look at, for example, how Facebook grew, it followed the breadth first search design, almost to a T, where they start at Harvard. Actually, so they start at the Porcellian, which is the peak, the social pinnacle of Harvard. Although they start in the bike room of the Porcellian because famously they won't let Mark Zuckerberg any higher. I think if Mark Zuckerberg had started upstairs in the Porcellian, he might just be dictator of the world today. There might be, it might be over. But he didn't. He started in the bike room, so there were people cooler than him already, which was a flaw, but not a deadly flaw. So he got all of Harvard into his social network, and then he was like, "What about Yale?" And he was like, "Nah." And then he was like, changes. Okay, fine, Yale. And then, he lets all of the Yale people in. And then from Harvard and Yale, they extend. They're like, all right. They get the rest of the Ivy League. Then they get Penn. Then they get all other colleges. Then finally, there's this magic moment where they go, high school students get accounts. And, every American of a certain age can remember when Facebook, which was this cool thing available only to your older brother who was already at Penn, you could be on there as a high school student too. And that was amazing. Right. And then, they got the rest of humanity. And of course, by the time they had all of humanity of a certain age on there, they had to replace they had to use moderation for quality control rather than saying, if you're on here, you're at Harvard, and as a Harvard man or woman, you know what to do. But that's how you have to evolve. And in particular, that process of your initial quality control is done through admission control. But over time, that moves towards moderation. I mean, for example, I don't think Urbit has ever had a spam problem. We need to be a bunch more successful before there's spam. There was a famous moment when the first spam occurred on Usenet. I was on Usenet at that time, and Usenet was already like wildly successful. And the idea of someone using it for, it was small, it was hundreds of thousands of people, but suddenly it was just, wow, there's a spamming target. You can post some stupid ad to every single news group. And they did, and they got a lot of flack, but it was the beginning of that. It was like the first, barbarian, appearing in like ancient Rome, in 405 AD. You're like, how did this guy get here? He doesn't belong here. That's weird. And then there's two of them, and before you know, the Vandals are at the gates, and that's what happened to Usenet. So if you're basically looking at creating really, really high quality conversation network, what is the structure of a really, really high quality conversation network? You basically want an amazingly well selected group of people selected by an amazing host. You want a bunch of, for example, insiders who really understand an area, and you want to basically protect their identities so they can speak really, really frankly. In other words, they need Urbit, and they need Urbit names, and you basically need to select or empower someone to select, to curate a group of people who can have an amazing conversation about, say, venture capital or science fiction or bicycle repair or any of the million things that people can become experts in. You need to create these amazing centers of conversation by going out and recruiting the people to do them. And then you need to let these private conversation centers kind of blossom into into the kind of graph points of a public ontology of conversations. Because of course, one of the things Usenet had that Reddit didn't was an actual ontology. So an ontology, a sort of a structured information space. So for example, on Reddit, of course, anyone can start a Reddit. And so there are two Reddits about Bitcoin, our Bitcoin and our BTC. They passionately disagree about something. I forget what it is. And you would never know that it was a block size war thing or something. You would never know which is which except by going into them. Like, that's a horrendous state of affairs for navigable public conversation. Of course, it would be great to correct that on Urbit. Now, furthermore, when you're basically building a conversation network in the 2020s, one of the things that you're obviously doing is you're creating training data for an AI. And I think one of the things that's sort of, in the developing ethos of like, what do you train your AI data on? I think one of the things that we can basically all agree on is that we would love to have a place to post our thoughts where actually the license does not allow that to be slurped up by random giant corporate AIs. All you got to do is post a notice. That's the law, right? And if people are breaking the law, you can do sort of what map makers do and kind of post a little detail that anyone copying is going to find. And if people are like illegally slurping up your content and putting them in your centralized AI, just find a phrase that only appears in your blog posts and nowhere else, and just see if the AI can complete that phrase. There's no way for the centralized, companies to defeat that attack. So, this creates a very interesting world where everybody's data licensing is controlled by the author for purposes of AI. That creates an opportunity to create basically, if you assume, obviously assuming success, that you've created a network of the best, most interesting conversations on Earth in the system, which obviously will take years. You've also created the potential to produce the best informed AI on Earth, similar to the like sort of crude AI that you're doing every time you use, the dying thing that is Google to search site:/reddit.com in the vain hope of finding some content on the internet that was actually written by a human being. Of course, now the AIs are posting to Reddit too, so you're kind of hosed. Is that you can actually have, if we in the world of Urbit have the best conversations, we in the world of Urbit, and of course the question of what we means in a decentralized environment and how we control that is basically, Urbit is the smartest thing in the world, and that's real power. That's again kind of for comma territory. And all right, Justin informs me that I have been going on and on and on for almost 2 hours. Let me go on and on and on just a little bit more. Sorry, Justin. I have to do actually the original subject of this. You wanted the political science. I've been stringing you along. You were hoping for some political science. Fine. You had to listen to all these stupid details about building decentralized operating systems, MBA stuff. It's terrible. Now we've gotten to the political science. So when you look at, Urbit is and I didn't understand this really anywhere near as well as I should have when I came back into Urbit. I have no excuse for this. I really should have understood it. It's a fascinating political problem, not in terms of like real world, stupid election, whatever politics. Don't worry about that. Whatever happens, it won't change anything. I guarantee it. But just in terms of Urbit as a polity, as a polis in the Greek, as a sort of digital city of its own, it's a tremendously interesting structure. And so we really have, in any political structure, there are three forces: democracy, oligarchy, and monarchy. The power of the many, the power of the few, the power of the one. And when we look at the power of the many, of course, we what do we think of when we think, democratic? We think, for example, decisions are made by the community in public. Democracy, for example, and transparency really go together. And people love democracy. It is universally loved. People would much rather be citizens. People would often rather be citizens in a poorly governed, world than subjects of a good government. I think that this is bad, and people should just want to be well governed. But people also like power. They would never say, "Oh, I like power." What they would say is, "I want to create change. I want to make an impact. I want to matter. I want to have meaning." All these are euphemisms for I like power because I've been descended from chimpanzees for 5 million years, and male chimpanzees are much more likely to reproduce if they have chimp power. Right? That urge is that urge to matter is very, very deep biologically. And so that sense of what do the people want really always ultimately matters. Personally, I think the best way to appeal to the people is to give them useful software that they can use. But another way to appeal to the people is to respect them, to show them deference, to show them love, to show them that we care about them out there, and to invite their input on decisions. Unfortunately, inviting their input on decisions, my favorite example of this, and this is the way that DAOs work, is everyone has a token, gets the vote. At least it's one token, one vote, and not one man, one vote, which means in practice, rather than being democratic, it's plutocratic. But even transparent plutocracy feels at least reasonably equal, and doing one man, one vote on the blockchain is really not possible, thankfully. But still, these are the sort of Republican with a small r processes that people get used to, that they expect as a matter of right. They're like, this is a community working together as a community. So people that really see an open community, when they suddenly see that the fate of this community is being decided behind closed doors in backroom meetings driven by ugly financial and legal concerns, they tend to be like, "Ugh," and who can blame them, right? Who can blame them? Democracy is certainly the most beautiful of forms. On the other hand, it is not the most effective of forms. Generally, any decision is more likely to be, with certain exceptions, is more likely to be made better by a smaller number of people. In particular, well, we'll get to that. And so the problem is that actually running something that has to succeed, in the real world, it's got to work well to succeed in the real world. And if it makes bad decisions, it can make you as happy as you want. But it's like the shareholders of Chipotle voting on the next burrito flavor. They're going to vote for some kind of avocado strawberry, burrito, just because it sounds funny, and burrito McBurrito face, and the company is going to fail. So it's actually much better, even for the shareholders, if they don't make those decisions themselves. If they say, no, from democracy, we're going to kick it up to oligarchy, meaning in the case of Chipotle, the board of Chipotle. And then the board is not even going to make the decision on the burrito flavor themselves. They're going to outsource that and all other management decisions to a monarchy, to a CEO. Monarchy meaning literally the governance of one. And then they're going to hold that CEO accountable and say, what were your quarterly results? Why are you losing money year after year? Why don't we find another CEO who doesn't lose money year after year? Or, of course, I assume Chipotle, prints money, because I see a lot of Chipotles, even though the burritos are, by San Francisco standards, frankly, pretty terrible. I don't know how it is that random taco trucks in San Francisco can make a better burrito than a giant multi-billion-dollar company like Chipotle. But I guess that just makes the case for the small and the flexible. And so, that's democracy. Democracy is, what do Urbit users think, or what do they want? That's a hard question to answer. Um, you know, in trying to get this thing off the ground, I would say, some have criticized me for not spending enough time, for me personally not spending enough time on Urbit. I'm basically like, number one, once I start, I'm going to spend all of my time on Urbit, and you don't really want that, because I can't not respond to a conversation. Number two, basically, actually, for a kind of independent design voice, I feel like I want to contribute the ideas that I have undiluted, both to oligarchy and to democracy. And we're going to define what oligarchy means here in just a second. And it's better for me to basically preserve my creative independence in that way, because those ideas will inevitably be diluted by reality. Sometimes I'll do the reverse thing. Like, one of the things with the multi-bridge design is I designed it, and then I said to Rollreichs, I was like, okay, you go and design this. I said that to a couple of people, and lo and behold, I had made assumptions which they didn't share, and the design came out better without those assumptions. And I'm like, well, I could have done that well if I hadn't made wrong assumptions, but I did make wrong assumptions. And so, as a sort of way of kind of bringing us back to a world of normalcy, which is a fake word, by the way. Harding invented that word in 1920. I mean, the correct word is normality. So bringing, back to a world of normalcy where we're not doing any backroom this or that, and there are no sort of weird coups or diplomatic events or other, disturbing things happening in a very Silicon Valley like kind of way, is where we want to be going forward. And I think it'll actually be important and good to do our blockchain renovations through the UIP process. But of course, we had to get there. That's democracy. Democracy is good. Democracy is important. Democracy is not everything. Now to oligarchy. Oligarchy is good. Oligarchy is important. Oligarchy is not everything. So one of the things that I'm really most proud of about having created, it's easy to invent something, right? To invent something and have it get any level of traction at all is extremely hard and takes a lot of luck as well as a lot of skill. And I feel like I've had a lot of luck. And one of the things that I've had a lot of luck in, as I come back and look at the new world of Urbit, is the extent to which it really, really has become the development of core Urbit is an oligarchy. To be exact, it's the best kind of oligarchy. It's a true aristocracy. Aristocracy, not, people think of like hereditary aristocracy like Downton Abbey. Well, those aristocrats were great, of course, but aristocracy really means rule of the best. And, that's a fundamentally competitive, problem. And like that sort of rewards feats of strength and excellence. I recall, a story about one core engineer who's kind of a wild man. And like the story is this wild man who's clearly been ingesting God knows what substance. And he's like half naked in his room in, Australia or some other godforsaken place. And like in this condition, he orchestrates the largest ever migration of like live Urbits that's ever been performed, and like, and everyone's just like, yeah, that was cool. He just upgraded 1,000 ships at the same time, didn't miss a beat, everything kept working, and the kind of the rule of like, when people start really trying to impress each other with that kind of thing, when they start being very skeptical of people coming into the project, like, show me what you can do, show me your chops, like, and when that kind of, society really gets cooking, it's the most powerful thing in the world. Nothing can beat it, right? And, basically, until your research program reaches that level of like arrogance, like arrogance is even the word. An aristocracy and oligarchy should be arrogant. It shouldn't, be more arrogant than it deserves to be. It shouldn't be overly cocky. It shouldn't be overly proud, but it should be proud. If it's not proud, it's not an aristocracy. And, part of the thing that sort of surprised me coming back in here is basically, I, as the person who developed the system and worked on it for 11 years and, with the demiurge of this universe, didn't expect the response of like, oh, you want to be our leader? Prove it. Show us what you got, man. And I'm like, that's both incredibly annoying and incredibly justified. And like and so the sense of being that sort of open source aristocracy is just really, really, like, that makes this project unkillable, absolutely unkillable. So many things pretend to have that quality, would give like their left testicle to actually have it in reality, and we have it. And that's one of the things that makes this project incredibly special. On the other hand, basically, that's still like collective leadership. That's still collective decision making. You're still basically, in the IETF, which is the Internet Engineering Task Force, which is where internet standards come from, profoundly aristocratic organizations. People spend decades trying to climb to the peak of this, where they become these like deeply respected neckbeards. Where the ITF has a meeting, people, crowds, when you're one of these like highly evolved neckbeards, like crowds will pass around you as like, Linus Torvalds, or someone walks down the not Linus Torvalds at IETF. God, I forget the name. I haven't been involved in IETF except very briefly 25 years ago, but I'm sure they're still there, the alpha neckbeards, and they deserve every bit of credit they have. They've created a whole universe. On the other hand, when you're making decisions in this way, basically there's a real trade-off between, I go very deep on some subject and I can see the whole thing. And open source aristocrats tend to be experts in the piece of the puzzle in front of them. They do not tend to be experts in making all of the generalized strategic decisions, some of them political, some of them financial, that are required to make a thing succeed. And so they they tend to over optimize in certain directions and kind of be trapped in hill climbing problems. And this is why you basically need the last form of governance, which is monarchy, which is centralized decision making. And the best way to centralize decision making is to just focus on one person whose responsibility is just to make good decisions. And if he or she makes bad decisions, the thing dies. And that's sort of the way, I resist singing the praises of monarchy in general. This is not the place for that. But certainly, if people had invented a better way for large organizations to be governed that wasn't a monarchy, that made those organizations work better. If, for example, Apple worked better by having, let's say, Apple had a Congress and a Supreme Court, and let's say the Congress is elected by everyone who has an iPhone, and something, we'd all be using Android in 5 years. I guarantee it. And so, and probably the same would be true even if Apple was led by Apple's core engineers. Or, for example, Bitcoin is led by Bitcoin's core engineers, who are amazing people, and they've created an amazing system. And yet, if Bitcoin had decided, oh, wow, we could actually have Turing complete smart contracts, there would be no Ethereum. In fact, I think Vitalik originally just wanted to improve Bitcoin to have better smart contracts. And if they had said yes to him rather than no, there would be no conflict between Bitcoin and crypto. It would be one and the same thing. And, the whole crypto sphere, I think, would be in an immeasurably stronger place. So essentially, when you look at what a monarchy can do, monarchy can basically um, um, consider the interests of a whole in a way that no aristocracy or democracy effectively can. Of course, Urbit as a whole will never be a monarchy because we have two powerful entities that each control a large number of galaxies, the Tlon Corporation and the Urbit Foundation, which need to be structurally separate. I would say that before August, they were not quite well separated enough, but I assure you that by now they are quite independent. And, my goal, at least for the operation of these independent organizations, I would like it to be very similar to the relationship between the US and Britain in the 19th century. I would like a very kind of special relationship kind of structure where you have a couple of different monarchies in a certain amount of tension pulling against each other and making decisions for the whole. And of course, the around these two large organizations, there are others. For example, there's Zorp, which is somewhat independent from Urbit, but using a lot of Urbit technology in a very effective way, doing amazing stuff with zero knowledge proofs. There are even smaller entities like Talkwex.syndicate, which sponsored the recent subassembly meetup. I'm sure I'm missing some. There have been others in the past. There will be others in the future. So you still ultimately have this not one monarchy, but an ecosystem of monarchies. Again, much harder to kill, not necessarily as perfect as having a single king, a single emperor overall, but actually creating what's going to, I think, over the following years and decades, is going to be a very effective and dynamic sort of, if complicated, composite system, which is almost certainly going to take over the world. I mean, not in a nice way, of course. And okay, I think that's my that was 2 hours. I hope I didn't rush too much on that, but I think I said some interesting things. And Justin,
No, that's good stuff. That was great.
Maybe we could do 3 or 4 hours of questions. I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Probably a half hour would I feel like I would just annoy people, and especially people's partners, if we did more than a half hour. But we could go a little longer if you want.
Okay, well, let's just try to get through them. I'll maybe keep your answers brief if you feel like it's easy to answer.
My answer's brief, Justin. I don't know what you're talking about.
Of course. No, I mean, that was a bit long, but there was a lot there. I mean, clearly you've made a lot of progress in thinking through the vision, and I thought the demo was pretty intriguing and exciting. And so you took some time to get there, but that was quite rich with important.
Took some time to get there. Okay, fine. I'll accept that as constructive criticism.
No.
I did. Thank you all for watching 2 hours of me monologuing. It was fun for you. I hope it was fun for me. I hope it was fun for you.
No, it was worth it, Curtis. It was good stuff. It was jam packed, and the chat in radio has been active. We still have 2 hours in. We still have 52 viewers live in radio, and a bunch of people on YouTube and on Twitter. So no, it was great. A lot of good stuff there. So, all right, let's just get after it. One question from Sonic Tadrick, and also Fidzod Fidfest also seconds this question. Will I be able to completely self-host what we saw in the video? Presumably, yes, right?
Yes, of course.
Yes, of course. Goes without saying. All right, easy. We're moving. Will authentication work from a hardware wallet as well?
Yes, of course.
Yes, of course. Let's go. Will Urbit feature a blockchain explorer?
Yeah, I don't see why not. It may not be a standard thing that it ships with. And of course, there are multiple different consensus engines out there. But again, this is a power user tool. So the wallet should be a power user's wallet. And it might not start out as a power user's wallet, but it should get there.
Okay, great. That was from Ladheck Hidfer. Shout out to Ladheck Hidfer. Let's see. We got a question here from Tabnix Riddle.
Tab Nikes. Let's do it. I'm sorry, I have to insist.
It's okay. I won't be offended by you correcting me if you're patient with me relearning
No,
your.
I'm not offended by you pronouncing my names wrong either. So we're cool.
Well, do you put emphasis on L, like Riddell or Riddle?
Riddle. Oh, it's always Trachaic.
Okay. Will Curtis become the official ICEO of Urbit, or maybe co-ICEO in a 2-in-the-box arrangement like you like to talk about with the Manhattan Project?
The management structure is still, undefined. We haven't, it's sort of like when you're in the process of, it's just like in any, startup world, the important thing is there is a leadership group and then we're out there making things happen. When we make things happen, basically that will cement, I'll certainly be in charge of strategic decisions. But ultimately, the board is still in charge of me because I really believe in the board system and I love our board.
Okay, great. Love it. Let's see. I'm going to assert a question here. Listening to you talk, I want to know what you think about sort of the intersection of AI and crypto. Specifically, there's sort of this increasingly interesting kind of vector of experimentation taking place right now where, kind of AI bots are linking up with crypto wallets. And you probably saw this saga where, P. Marca gave 50 grand of Bitcoin to an AI bot. And then there was, kind of interesting distributed shenanigans going on with the appreciation of a meme coin linked to that. And one can squint at all of this. And it looks like quite interesting stuff where we're starting to see certain kinds of cybernetic mutual escalations between crypto and machine intelligence. I'm just curious, how does Urbit fit into this picture specifically of this exciting prospect of sort of intelligent machine?
Well, we're certainly seeing, we're certainly seeing Ponzi-nomic, interactions of crypto and AI in that, the world in which crypto was, the hotness, send all your money, no questions asked, and it's now AI. And so whenever I see the intersection of two buzzwords, which appear to have very little to do with each other, I feel like I'm in, I guess someone posted I can't really do this image justice, but they posted a picture of the union of crypto and AI, and the picture was you take a bar of soap and then stick the dispenser part of a soap dispenser, jam it into it. So, it's and I think a lot of these, basically, normally when you see a crypto to AI pivot, that's sort of the easiest way to know that something was bullshit before it is bullshit after. When we look at, crypto, agents or whatever, I think that the, I don't really believe, I don't believe in autonomous agents for a very simple reason, which is that legally there are no autonomous agents. Nothing can act autonomously. Let's say, for example, I take a drone, I put AI on that drone, and I put a Glock on the drone, and I program the AI to recognize redheads. And then I say, fly free, little drone, go out in the streets of San Francisco and kill the first redhead you see. Well, that's an autonomous agent. It's acting on its own. Okay. But for me to go into court and say, well, I didn't do it, the drone did it. I mean, come on, man. All you did was you took basically real world resources and you put it under the control of an unpredictable and essentially mysterious to you machine. However intelligent that machine is, maybe it made a mistake. Maybe it killed a brunette. Maybe it makes no mistakes. Maybe it only kills redheads, whatever. But it's not the bullet that's killing. It's the gun. It's not the gun. It's the drone. It's not the drone. It's you. So the thing is basically separating some device from your ability to control that device is essentially a stunt. You're responsible for that thing, whether you want to be or not. And, if you basically give an AI the resources it needs to break the law and it breaks the law, I'm pretty sure the Supreme Court is not going to say, oh, it was the AI that did it, not you. So when we go to so when we answer the question of Urbit and AI in what I believe is a sort of non-hype driven way, we do get some interesting answers. So one of the answers I alluded to earlier is basically simply the opportunity created by a decentralized network, which produces a lot of content and does not license it automatically for use for ingestion into large language models. That's one point. Point number two is, of course, in a personal server, one thing you're going to want to do is train a generic large language model on your own stuff so that, for example, it can automatically respond to text messages or whatever. Not that you're going to have it automatically respond to text messages, but basically actually predicting what you might say is a pretty useful feature. And over time, you're just going to basically find yourself clicking yes, 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 yes. And it, that is and it will speak in your own voice because it is trained by you on your own work. Now, when you look at what AI is actually doing, of course, it's crunching a lot of data extremely fast, and Nock itself is not known for being very fast. But actually, that's a more perfect fit than you might recognize, because the way that AI does this is not by using the CPU in your computer. It's by using a GPU. It's by using some bit of NVIDIA gear. And your custom chip or your GPU or your ASIC or your FPG out there is very, very good at doing certain kinds of things like matrix multiplies with, 16-bit floating point or something very, very fast. This is exactly what Urbit is good at, because Urbit's jet mechanism basically lets you delink the semantics of the operation that you're performing from how that operation is implemented. And so you say, I would like to multiply, instead of when you're using like PyTorch or something, and you're like, I want to multiply two matrices really, really fast. You're like, I'm going to call some weird library that Python is linked from. And so I'm going to go from Python to C, and then the C is going to call out to some weird device driver interface, which actually talks to the hardware, get some results, send it back into Python. And so you're basically talking to this wild and woolly system. Okay. The way that works in Urbit, sometimes these systems are actually non-deterministic, which is insane to me. Or at least unpredictable in a way that makes them effectively non-deterministic. And the way that's supposed to work in Urbit is, I would say, wow, I have all these matrix multiplies to do. Why don't you, the computer, figure out how to do them as fast as possible? And then the interpreter designer recognizes that in a somewhat automatic way, I don't want to go into the details of jet binding here, recognizes that the user has asked to perform an operation which it has seen before, which it knows to be identical to this hardware thing, and does that invisibly and opaquely within the interpreter. So actually the programmer can never tell that they're not running completely pure code, or they could tell, but only by seeing how fast it goes. So, when you're basically doing AI programming in that way, you have this beautiful isolation from the hardware, and that means you just program. You don't program for NVIDIA or AMD or whatever thing that you're running on at the bottom level. And that means, for example, you're not locked into NVIDIA, which is why NVIDIA has a $3 trillion market cap, which is money that I'm sure they do a great job, but that's money that someone else should be taking from them. And so actually, Urbit is a great environment on which to execute unusual hardware-dependent, efficiency-related operations, which are handled in this foreign function interface today, which is lamentable.
Okay.
So cool. That is the real connection between Urbit and AI, is that basically Urbit should be an efficient place on which to execute large language models on your own code. And that should be done in a way that is completely, mathematically isolated from the underlying hardware, but still efficient.
Very interesting. That's very interesting. That's great. Thank you for that. And let's see, from Sonic Tadrick, the question is, if the multi-way bridge...
Tadrick.
If the multi-way bridge will span so many chains, each with its own governance and forks, how do you hope to ossify Arvo?
Because Arvo, Arvo is going to have to know about the existence of the multi-bridge, and Arvo needs to not only know about the existence of the multi-bridge, but in order to find the details of a specific ship, has to basically be able to look at the multi-bridge, say, "Aha, this planet is on Solana. I'm going to reach out to the Solana, to whatever is in Fura for Solana. I'm going to reach out to however I talk to that consensus mechanism and pull that data into Urbit." And that's why basically adding a chain to the multi-bridge is still something. And by the way, setting the bridging fee, because if you remember, the bridging fee goes the way I want to do bridging fees is, number one, it's only on the outbound, and it goes to the Oracle, which is always a Galaxy. I don't own any Galaxies, so none of this can possibly go to me. And those fees should be set by the Senate of all Galaxies, which should also approve whatever bridges exist. And so, yeah, if you look at the blockchain and you're just like, I want to know what the operating key, the networking key for this planet is, and the planet is on Bitcoin, you need to go out and ask someone that you trust to monitor the Bitcoin state to like find that Bitcoin taproot annotation or however you're doing that and get the correct data. That's not a huge problem.
Okay, great. Let's see. Here's a good question from Wispem Lantex. The question is, does JD Vance have an Urbit ID? Do we know?
Not as far as I'm aware.
But you're not saying he doesn't. We don't know, I guess. Yes, we don't know. Okay. Intriguing question. Let's see. First vice president possibly to own an Urbit ID. Who knows? We'll find out. All right. Let's see. Similar question from Hassan Hassel. Is Barron Trump on Urbit yet? Aim for the future, not the past.
I think that, all right, I'm appealing to everyone out there. If you know Barron Trump, let's I'm pretty sure I'm a reasonably small number of degrees of separation from Barron Trump. So I'm sure he's working hard on, what is it? What's the blockchain project? Trump coin or something. But, if you ever get tired of that, Barron, give me a call. I love you. I think you're beautiful. I think you're very, very tall. We can surely work something out.
There you go. All right. Open invitation. Someone get Barron. All right. A lot of people in the chat are saying stuff related to this. I'll cite though specifically, and here I got you on this one, Curtis. Tabnike's riddle says, can Curtis connect his X account to the Trill app? A lot of people want you to post on Trill. I'm sure you're familiar with Trill. Is sort of the Twitter on Urbit. It's actually a pretty cool app. People really want you to post on Trill.
Okay, that's fair. I basically I feel like in terms of the wartime model of Urbit, I feel like things are sort of going in a clear direction. It is probably time for me to sacrifice all of my copious spare time into actually descending into Urbit world. Now that I have a clear idea of what I want it to be, I need to get over my reluctance to see it as it is. I think that I don't know if there's any syndication between Trill and Twitter, because of course this is also outgoing propaganda. But there's basically, in a way, there's also a transition between, I want to tell the world about this thing. I want to I know the world knows about it. You want to find out all the cool stuff, come in, because I think in the long run, when I talked about utopia, one of the things that I didn't mention that I believe in, is relatively important, is for basically a content pool to drive users to the site, the content pool has to be invisible outside the site. This is why Elon basically gated off. I used to read Twitter by browsing it from the web all the time. Twitter is no longer a website. It has a vestigial, X is no longer a website. It has a vestigial connection to the web but it is a walled garden. And the thing is, I think eventually we need to have a walled garden, walled but not centralized garden, a walled decentralized garden, which seems like a contradiction in terms, but isn't. In some ways, like the worst mistake I made when designing Urbit was Air, the web server, because basically when you post something and you syndicate it to the web, that sort of eliminates the idea, oh, here's this cool pool of content, which you have to get into the space for. So again, like we need to get out of wartime mode, but like, yeah, that's the direction to go in.
Yeah, understandable. Well, it's true what you said about dog fooding, right? If you believe that, then I guess that's consistent with what you're saying.
Absolutely. Except that it's sort of infuriating when you use something that you're not, when you use a system that like, other people have been developing for 5 years, because then you're actually eating someone else's dog food. But
Sure. But you know what, Curtis, I think
it's
honestly,
my dog food now.
I think in many ways you're going to be pleasantly surprised, in fact, how well developed some of these apps are.
Oh,
like,
yeah. I mean, I think that, let me give credit to how good a job not just Galen, but all app developers have done, but also Galen. Like, this is really like, this system is much, I don't think it's real yet, but it's still much, much closer to, I don't think it's real yet in terms of having cracked, it should have users and not fans. But in terms of how close it is insanely close.
Yeah.
People
Trill is
don't
one
realize,
of the
people don't realize how much work by how many people had to go into this system to get it this insanely close to being real.
There's a lot of quite impressive apps that are not even well known. There's so many of them, actually. Like Trill is surprisingly well developed. It's a very developed app. And also Turf is the gather.town that exists on Urbit. It's Urbit native gather town. It's also pretty impressive. Like, people don't actually know about a lot of these apps, which are surprisingly well developed when you look at them. But
Turf is for all who are our female users who are never mind. But won't go there. But cool. Turf, everyone is welcome on Urbit, Turf's included.
Yeah, cool. All right.
It's another. So let me step back through something I was thinking about earlier today. The thing about building apps that's really important, basically, when you're really maturing the system in a young system, and Turf, I happen to know, is no exception to this, which is why I was thinking about Turf. I'm like, why do we use gather.town instead of using Turf on a daily basis in Urbit? It's because, as in so many things, that app basically is a way of seeing deficits in the core under that app, in this case, I think scaling issues that basically need to be solved in a systematic way. And the thing you should know if you're looking at developing apps for Urbit, number one, do it for fun, do it as a vocation. It's not a startup yet. And number two, expect that in order to get your app to work as well as you want, it may not be true, but expect it. Expect that in order to be able to get your app to work as well as you want, you're going to have to go in, and you shouldn't say, hey, core developers, should you fix this thing for me? I mean, not saying it is better than is worse than saying it. By all means, say it. But the best way to proceed in building something in Urbit that works is to be prepared to roll up your sleeves and basically work on the core with the lessons that working on that application taught you, because that's really the way, and there's no other way in which an operating system becomes mature.
Right on. All right. Excellent. Good stuff. Thanks for that, Curtis. Let's see what else we have here. All right. Simple question here from Tab Nikes Riddle. How does one actually contribute to Urbit exactly? Go to urbit.org, get in touch with the foundation. There's grants. There's an Urbit foundation group on Urbit. You can check in with them and learn what's going on, learn what needs help. But what would you say to that, Curtis?
I would say your answer is excellent.
Cool. Those are kind of the main starting points for most people. Let's see what else, and join the radio live stream during these calls. Let's see. Question here from Hassel Divtyke. If we can't count on the Internet Archive or Google Cache, since neither of those archive anything anymore, should we assume that we have to count on individuals and by extension, read-write scalability to access this material? What's the alternative to this aside from just leaving the internet behind and with it, the world's archives?
Well, there's a lot of, there are a lot of these kinds of problems that are solved by other networks in a way that Urbit should either, and I'm not really sure, integrate with or replace. Existing decentralized system that is coinless but works quite well is BitTorrent. That, of course, has inspired Filecoin / IPFS. That's a content address storage infrastructure, which I guess people disagree on how well it works or how much it's being used actively. Having something like that is out there is not only does having something like that out there excellent. One of the things that IPFS needs that Urbit can supply is that it needs to be pinned. And I think there are very interesting integrations to perform out there. Broadly speaking, when I look at a lot of these decentralized services out there, in the kind of previous generations, you're basically it's like looking, let's say you're the car industry in the 1880s, and you have this great idea about transmissions, and you're just I'm going to build this amazing transmission. Well, okay, yeah, that's great. Then you spent 5 years building an automatic transmission, and it's 1885, and an automatic transmission is still not a product in 1885. Actually, the only thing that can be a product in 1885 is the car. And it probably has a very limited transmission. It's probably not a great transmission. But you know what? You can drive a car, but you can't drive a transmission. And so sort of people build these things that are sort of necessary service parts of a decentralized future. And they kind of wonder why the parts don't all come together and turn into a decentralized operating system. And it's no, you got to start with a full stack.
Okay.
And so I think that some of the experiences with decentralized services, you can look at a lot of these utility coiny things and say, well, that might work as part of something else, but by itself, I don't know that it's ever going to work. But it's a real inspiration for this is an organ that Urbit should have, but that organ on its own is kind of like a liver on its own.
Okay, great. Let's see. Another one here from TikTive Dismer. Curtis, have you ever read the Last Psychiatrist's book, Sadly Porn? And if so, what did you think of it?
I did not read. I read some parts of it. My impression, and I'm loath to praise the traditional publishing industry, but there's a concept in traditional publishing known as the editor. And people have said to me often, Curtis, I love you. You need an editor. But I think other people would also maybe say that to the Last Psychiatrist, who's really one of the great internet writers of his time.
Okay.
But I think that, if you're looking for a great work of internet text, the work that I recommend is a book called Two Arms and a Head.
Okay, excellent. Thanks.
But that's a disturbing book, just warning.
All right, fair warning. Trigger warning. Thank you. Let's see. Got a question here from, let's do this one by Biznike's More Mile. Is that how you want me to say it?
That's good. Yeah. No,
Okay.
that's not. No, Justin. No, Hatrikes. That's not how I want you to say it.
That's
how
the
you
correct
say
way.
it. That is
Okay.
the correct way to say it.
All right. Have you ever thought about separating Arvo to be able to use multiple different azimuths?
So basically, no. And this gets into the question of that I mentioned earlier, which is the question of standardization. Is that imagine one of the reasons for the success of the internet is it's really the internet and Unix are a single stack in a way. And so, which are literally connected by this system of reserved ports. Like you connect to something on port 80 and it's running a Unix HTTP server. And so if you answer that question with respect to the internet, you might say, well, has anyone tried running Unix on multiple different internets? Like maybe the internet, one internet address means one thing in one place and one thing in another place. Or maybe there's a bit that says, no, actually, basically, multiple competing addressing standards are generally bad news. And because they're generally bad news, one tends to kill the other very fast. There were actually two standards competing to be the internet. There was the DoD standard of TCP/IP, and there was the European OSI standard. And the OSI standard from Europe, despite being a typical product of European computer science, about which said the less, European system software about normally European academic system software about normally which the less said the better. The OSI model, the formal structure of OSI was so much clearer than the formal structure of TCP/IP, that when you study networking and computer science, you still study it through the lens of the OSI model. However, if there are any machines still running OSI, networking, they're in a closet somewhere in France. And they probably don't work unless you put some garlic into them or something. So yeah, that's actually not a stable situation. Similarly, when you basically say, okay, there are multiple addressing schemes, you recall my discussion earlier, what happens if you make, ENS addresses usable in some way on Arvo? Okay, fine, you could do that, but you're creating a universe where you have 99% of ENS addresses don't respond to Arvo messages and 1% does. So you're really not going to bother sending Arvo messages to a random ENS address. And so, this is really a case where all networking depends on standards. It depends on a standard protocol, standard addresses. When you try to fracture those things, you just damage the whole system. You're just kind of doing a vandalism.
Yep. That makes sense to me. Let's see. Here's one from, and you still have a little stamina for a few more, Curtis. Maybe like 5 more or something like that, I think. Okay, cool. Let's see. From Solhez Natbez. Are there any hardware products in the sphere outside of self-hosting box? Or maybe talk about that more broadly, like how do you think about hardware, or what do you see in the future of hardware?
Urbit, first of all, self-hosting boxes are great and cool, although cloud hosting should be private enough that it's not necessary. But let's have it as a backup even in that case. And I'm like having a little, I guess a company that I didn't mention in the space is Native Planet, which is producing exactly that, and having a little box, which is your digital life. And maybe you can buy 2 of those little boxes and they back each other up. Something like that is like, there's real greatness in that. And that should absolutely be a thing. In terms of hardware in general, I would also repeat what I said earlier, which is that basically Urbit is really, really good because of this JET system at basically using custom hardware. It is actually much better than other software systems at adapting to it because it has that level of abstraction where the programmer can't see if he or she is using custom hardware at all. And because of that, essentially, when you have one of the things about modern hardware is you got this thing called dark silicon, where basically you just have, the main constraint is actually power rather than area. So it makes a lot of sense to include relatively obscure hardware implemented functions on your chip that might be used 0.001% of the time, but it's still worth having them on there. And so in a world in which Urbit is the normal way of computing, it really unlocks just like innovation in dark silicon, where, CPU makers are going to be like, what functions are people running these days? And just kind of throw that functionality onto the chip pretty willy-nilly. And that's a very, that generates a very dynamic spiral of optimization. I mean, you have a world where, when Urbit really takes off, everybody has an Urbit. They're mostly in the cloud, and these cloud vendors are constantly customizing their interpreters in both hardware and software, because they're actually looking at what algorithms people are running and seeing, can we reduce costs and improve performance by putting this algorithm in hardware. And when you're basically constantly able to look at what your giant cloud system is crunching just statistically and say, wow, we could gain a certain amount by ordering this function on our next version of upgraded chips. And again, the programmer never notices, it's all sort of, under that abstraction layer, then that just creates a really, really healthy ecosystem.
Okay, great. Let's see. Question here from Hassan Hassel. Would the foundation be willing to care for a handful of Urbit apps so there's something guaranteed to not be broken, to be always working, basically, at all times, guaranteed? Like beside the apps, the few apps that do.
I think that we're still working out the right division of responsibilities between the Urbit Foundation and Talon. So I kind of want to punt that question because I want to leave that question as open as possible. Certainly, the Urbit Foundation should make sure that Urbit is always as useful as possible by whatever means necessary.
Okay, great. A few people now have asked about stars just generally. Are there any updates on how stars are going to fit into the kind of the new program? Don't feel the need to go over stuff we've talked about in previous sessions, but
I don't know. What do you mean by how stars are going to fit into the new program? That's not.
I guess just meaning, sort of the tokenomic logic and the governance structure.
The tokenomic logic. I mean, the thing is, the only thing, again, there's only we're azimuth, we're address-based maximalists. The only thing that could be done, and I'm not even saying we would do it, but we certainly doing research into what's most appropriate. The only things that seem appropriate are, number one, possibly doing the planet issuance quotas so that which slows down to 10 years the population of Urbit, because it'll take that long anyway, and the party always starts in the kitchen, and we don't want vast armies of spammer planets out there. And that's one thing. And then basically making sort of quasi-fungible but non-fungible things like virgin stars and planets fungible, and is the only other thing. Those are not, so you're basically you're preserving the fundamental sort of structure of land. You're just basically making it a little bit easier to trade.
Okay, great. I think there might just be only one or two more.
Perfect.
There's a few that I think are just sort of, we covered them in the past, or they're not too pointed or interesting. Yeah, do you have any forward thoughts? I think you might have covered this from Lad to Heck Hidfer. Do you have any forward thoughts about how AI will be integrated or kept out? I guess we basically talked about that. You talked about sort of stamping.
I think we covered all of that. Maybe a stupid question. Let's end with just a stupid, funny question.
I think I might have spent those already. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna tee you up the final one, but I think we covered all the important ones from people. You said something in your presentation, Curtis, that I think you said it in passing, but I think it's really, really big and important, and I want to invite you to just sort of expand on it before we wrap this up. You said that the idea of an app basically disappears. I think this is very profound, and it gets to the heart of the kind of
this is a core shrubbery concept. If you want to think about it, the easiest way to think about this, although it's very limiting, is there's a concept that basically got developed in the private sector that academia has never really recognized the importance of, or kind of generalized in the way it should, and that's the concept of the spreadsheet. And if you extend the idea of spreadsheet structures to include arbitrarily typed data that can be operated on and viewed under its own programmatic logic, I think you start to come somewhat closer to sort of this, shrubbery space. So instead of having a calendar app, for example, you have a kind of data which is calendar data, which can be managed by, say, integrating certain kinds of changes to calendar data. Or, for example, you can do collaborative editing of a calendar with the right functions. You can display a calendar. Maybe you can display a calendar in 2D as well as 3D. I don't know, but you have basically, this is really kind of doing the, like, for the old Gall Urbit application model, I was basically like, I know there's something more interesting that goes here. I don't know what it is, so I'm just going to do the stupid obvious thing. And I did that actually while developing Urbit for a lot of things, or I never would have finished it. And so to have that system working, and then have people go back and say, no, we're actually not done doing computer science research here. There's actually more and better that we can create. We can generalize the system more. And when we don't generalize it more, we start to see boilerplate where we're just like, why are we doing the same thing over and over again here and here and here and here? And you start to come in the direction of this, like, what's called the shrubbery direction, which I hated the name, but I'm warming up to it. And, this is sort of one of the kind of more researchy directions that we're going into. Don't expect it to be the way things work, tomorrow or next week, but, it's clearly part of, finding the, the fullness of this incredible vision that we're rushing toward. And it's, of course, always a balance between falling down a research rabbit hole and delivering things that people actually can use. And I don't know in this particular area what exactly that balance is. I do know that it's currently being rewritten, and it will probably be rewritten again before it ships to users. As everything in Urbit, before anyone saw any part of this system, I had rewritten every part of the system at least 3 or 4 times.
Okay.
So that's the way we develop.
All right. Well, Curtis, thank you so much for this. Thanks for being so generous with your time and, really putting so much thought into all this and sharing with the community every step of your thinking along the way. This was really interesting, and a lot of new, important updates kind of shown through in your presentation today. And thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for hanging out on radio on Urbit. Thanks for the good questions. A lot of questions this time. Really good stuff. And if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow Urbit Foundation on Twitter. Follow Curtis on Twitter. He posts a lot of articles. Curtis is clearly thinking very hard about this, and he's actively publishing his thought process. So you can follow along with that. And we do these every month. You can also subscribe to the Urbit Foundation newsletter at urbit.org. We send out kind of some written highlights from these addresses and other things going on in the community. So just thank you everyone for hanging out.
Amazing. And thank you also Glueware for that amazing animation. We have the best animation folks here at Urbit Foundation. And,
shout out to Glueware. And on that point, we'll go out with the same song and video we came into. So good night, everyone. I'll play it right now. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you same time, same place next month. There we go.